I remember that when I was in high school here in Portugal, we had a writer, um, a writer of plays from, I guess, the 19th century or something like that. And he wrote political plays. And basically, what he said is that um, it was the duty of a writer to educate people politically. And basically he was saying that writing should be to or should serve the use of producing some sort of conscience in people. And when you went and read his plays, oh my God,
Terrible, right?
you couldn't go past the first page. That was so boring. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Because everything there had to have a political undertone, and people had to make political commentary all the time, the characters, and it was just awful. And I was just thinking, because I was just watching the new Tarantino movie.
Oh, I love
and
it.
yeah, and you look at his movies, and he has a very dark, twisted kind of humor. But because if you
Yeah.
took many of the things that he puts his characters to saying in the movies out of context, he would be in jail, no
Yeah.
chance. But he makes jokes about everything, about
Yes.
even sexual thing and pedophilia and things like.
Everything.
Awful things. But what are you going to do? Are you going to laugh because it's funny in the context, or are you going to punish yourself and self-flagellate 50 times a day because you laughed at a pedophilic joke or something?
Not only that, fantasy is a safe way to explore all of our darkest tendencies. And we all have dark tendencies. They might vary from person to person, but we all have them. And how else do you safely look at those? How else do you laugh at yourself? How else are you able to embrace or dismiss anything from the sort of traditional structures that you may or may not want to participate in, to a more unconventional sort of structure? That's how we play with these things. That's how we're able to look at our lives from a distance. And if we're not looking at any reasonably accurate depiction of a human being's life, what are we getting from it? And if we're not being entertained by it, what are we getting from it?
Yeah, and it's interesting.
It has to be entertaining too. It has to be fun. It has to be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes there are some psychological studies that come out, like, for example, one that someone did, I think it was David Buss, where basically he asked people privately, of course, to say and to confess if they really ever thought about killing someone. And
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
96% or 94% of men already had those kinds of thoughts at least once in their life. And for women, it was pretty close. It was higher than 80%. And I read that and I think, okay, but that's not something I wouldn't expect, because everyone has those kinds of thoughts now and then. But you look at many people and they are amazed at how is it possible that people have those kinds of thoughts. And I think, okay, but I'm amazed not at people thinking
Yeah.
about killing another person, but at that kind of reaction. Because, I mean, are you so detached and disconnected from your own psychology
Exactly.
that you don't even notice that sometimes you have violent thoughts, or you think about hurting someone or killing them? Or, I mean, of course, most people fortunately don't do that, but I mean, and just people being somewhat negatively affected by knowing that people have those kinds of thoughts. I mean, what does it matter, man? If people are not hurting other people, I mean, what does it matter what kind of thoughts they have? I mean,
Well, it's true. I mean, we've gotten to this place where people are equating thought with action. And which is absolutely insane to me. I mean, you know, I don't know if when you were a kid, did you ever have the fantasy that you could read minds? I think we all like had that fantasy. Like, wouldn't it be great if I could read minds? In a way, Twitter has enabled us to read minds, because it's a very like shoot from the hip kind of medium, and social media is kind of like that, where people just type what they're thinking right in that moment, and they might regret it later. They might look at that tweet later and go, "Oh, I didn't really mean that." So in a way, we sort of have gotten this quasi ability to read people's minds, and it's become really ugly because people take that literally. I mean, of course, I mean, I've had some really awful thoughts about people who I love so much that I would probably give my life for them, you know? And yet I've had awful thoughts about them sometimes that kind of flash through my mind. And if they were privy to that thought, they would have a completely distorted view of how I really feel about them. And I think that social media does that a little bit. It really distorts who we are, and it makes racists, for instance, out of people who really inherently are not racist and go about their lives in a very humane way. But maybe they wrote something once, or had an evil little thought one day, or whatever it was, and we, you know, and we take it so seriously now in the public discourse. We take those sort of fleeting thoughts, those thoughts of murdering someone. You know, I mean, for heaven's sakes, I'm a writer. I've written about killers. I mean, I've written about assassins. I've written historical thrillers. If you're going to write a scene about somebody torturing and killing someone, you got to go there. You've got to imagine what it's like. You've got to imagine what kind of person, you know, what goes through a person's mind that brings them actually to the point where they do start doing those things, and what distinguishes you and me from that person. You know, it's, how do you not entertain those thoughts? How do you not play with them? You know, and haven't we always been playing with them? And haven't we, by and large, created a pretty civil society, considering, you know, how violent we can be, considering
yes,
what we're capable of? You know, I mean, really, just look at men and women, because men are stronger than women.
yeah,
I mean, they just are, right? Why haven't you killed us all? You know,
yeah,
why don't you keep us in cages? You could,
yeah,
and you don't. You're highly socialized. We've done a great job of socializing one another and working together, actually, over time, and even, you know, even historically, we've done a pretty good job of not abusing that power. That doesn't mean that those abuses don't exist, but overall, we've made it.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, I mean, when you're talking about serial killers, for example, of course, there's some elements where they're different from most people, but I mean, in most of their psychology, I mean, it's pretty close to the psychology of all other people. I mean, of course, we are different from one another, but we are also equals in many different ways. So, of course, I mean, of course, I have never killed anyone, nor I see myself in any circumstance doing that. But I mean, I can still imagine easily an extreme situation where I would do that. And I wouldn't even need to be I mean, forced by someone, perhaps forced by the circumstances, let's say, in a way, perhaps forced is not the best word to use here, but anyway,
no, but if someone breaks into your house, for instance, and threatens your family, threatens you or your family, that's one instance. War, that's instantly another instance that we could imagine ourselves.
Yeah, if you are, I don't know, homeless in a very shitty situation and you can't get food any other way. I mean, and not only I easily imagine any person doing that, but I also think that in that case we wouldn't like it, but it would be normal because I mean, it's just human nature. I mean, if you are in that sort of circumstance, I mean, what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna let you die of hunger or something like that? Or let someone enter your house and kill your family? Or let the other country invade your own and wipe everyone out? I mean, of course, you're not going to do that.
Most people are not that way. It's true. I think that there are probably some truly passive individuals out there, but I think that they're in the minority, and I think that they're in a really small minority, because most people, when pushed, want to survive. It's a survival instinct, and you know, I mean, I think that's why. I mean, one of the things that I've always enjoyed, I like when a story asks the question, "What would you do if the worst possible thing happened to you?" You know, for that character, and because I just think that's a very interesting question, and it's not always a depressing question. You know, you think, oh God, well that's a real downer, but it's not. It actually sometimes brings out the best in people. It's a really mixed bag, and it certainly brings out all elements of our humanity. It's, you know,
and I mean, it's interesting because that's one of the reasons why I love so much Japanese fiction, particularly manga and anime, because one thing that they do there, or almost all of the time they do, is that very rarely do they have a villain that is a completely bad person or a hero that is completely good all the time, you know. There's never that dichotomy between good and evil. I mean, evil people have good traits and good people have bad traits. And then a very interesting thing, I mean, we could be talking about genetics and people having different predispositions, but of course you're not going to do that in a fictional story. You won't explore those kinds of things because it's boring and so on. But I mean, one thing that they always or almost always do, and even for cartoons that are directed at children, is that they always give a background story for the villains and explain why they are like that, and you can relate to them very easily, even though they do sometimes really awful things. You can very easily imagining feeling some sympathy for them, or even putting yourself in their situation and thinking, oh, okay, maybe if I went through those sorts of awful things, I would also turn out like that. So
I mean, even going back to, you know, biblical stories, I mean, Satan was once God's favorite angel. He was the angel Lucifer, and he's a fallen angel. You know, these are stories that are hardwired in us, and I really do believe in the hardwiring of story. I think if you listen to a couple of my Love at First Rights, you might have come across this, so if I'm repeating myself, go, no, I already know this story. But like right before I got married, I was listening to a show called Talk of the Nation here, which is on National Public Radio, and it actually doesn't exist anymore, but it was a great show. It was 2 hours long, it was long form, and when it was hosted by this man named Ray Suarez. He was sort of like the Joe Rogan of National Public Radio, really interesting guy, and such a great interviewer. but he had this marriage expert on, and I think this guy is from Denmark. I can't remember, but whatever the case, he is the preeminent expert on marriage, and he's been studying marriage, you know, longer, like these really sort of very good and replicable and scientific studies for, you know, longer than anyone, really. I mean, I think he was at that time doing it for a quarter of a century. And he, for one, he was able to tell within like a shockingly brief period of time whether a couple would still be together in 5 years, just when he met them. He said, I say 5 minutes, but he's like, but really I can tell in like 30 seconds, but I always say 5 minutes. It was something like that, you know. But his contention was, one of the questions that Ray Suarez asked, he said, how do you know when a couple really, it's over and they cannot reconcile? And this marriage expert said something very interesting. He said, I know a couple, I know there is still hope and they can reconcile if they can tell the story of how they met and got together, and it still brings a smile to their face. It still lightens them. You can tell it's still a story that they feel a fondness for. But if they cannot tell that story with any sense of love or fondness or nostalgia or any good feelings, it's over. And I thought that was very interesting. And he talked about how important how we got together. The story of us is to, you know, a long-term relationship. And he was saying it's why people who say get together through like an extramarital affair, let's say, have a harder time of it, because that's a difficult story to tell. And unless you can say something like, we were both in these horrible marriages, and then we found one another, and then, you know, unless there were sort of other elements involved that can redeem the story and can redeem the two people in the story, it was a hard slog. I thought that was so interesting, and it made sense on such an intuitive level that, of course, you need to be able to tell your story in a way that gives it longevity, that gives it legs, and makes you feel good about it. And if you can't feel good about it, it rots from the inside. Anyway, for whatever it's worth, I thought that was fascinating.
Oh, by the way, we haven't yet started recording.
Oh, I know. Here we are, just like having a great conversation.
No. But what I was about to say is that I can still use, because I was already recording, even though I hadn't yet introduced you and things like that. I can still use parts of what we talked about before, because I mean it was flowing and it was very interesting. So.
We can, and by the way, if you want it, if you don't want to deal with the editing process, we can just go over it again. I can conjure it and make it look fresh. I did theater. You know what I mean? I've told that story many times. Let's put it that way. And to tell you the truth, it's not even anything that I have to conjure. I love telling that story. You know, I really enjoy telling stories, whether it's on paper or whether it's to people. And so, you know, I don't really mind finding a fresh angle and talking about it. It's fun for me. You know, it's also, I think, in telling a story more than once, you find things in it that you perhaps didn't see before.
Right.
You know, and anyway, so that's
I was just started rereading very slowly, of course, because I'm reading other things at the same time. But I was just started rereading The Lord of the Rings, and I mean, I read it the first time when I was just, I don't know, 12 or 13, and back then I only cared about the main events, let's say, and the action parts and things like that, and places in the narrative where something was happening, right? But now, I mean, now that I am much older, let's say, it's easier for older people to really appreciate the details of things, even the way he exposes things. I mean,
Oh, you're back.
Because they're.
I
Sorry?
lost you. I lost you for about 30 seconds. You froze.
Oh, okay. So
Just so you know, you're back, but obviously, but I lost you for that time. So I have no idea what you said the last 30 seconds.
Okay, I don't know what I was saying 30 seconds ago, but let me go back to. So I was saying that I was rereading The Lord of the Rings, right?
Yes, I got that part. And you were saying that when you were a kid, you were just, interested in the action, and now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was just about to say that being older now, it's interesting that you get to appreciate more details.
Yeah.
Of that piece of literature, let's say, because even in terms of how he decides to expose things, I mean, even that is meaningful in itself, because I mean, you could tell the exact same story in a completely different way, but and I mean, you could even just describe events all the time, and maybe when I was 12 years old I would have liked that, because I mean, don't take me through all of this journey that is so boring. Let's just go right to Mordor and to the war and things.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is a real mark of a master. Somebody who can write a story that is exciting enough that it can capture the imagination of a 12-year-old boy, but then when you go back and read it as a full-fledged man, you can appreciate it on a whole other level. I mean, that's masterful. Mm-hmm. That's really masterful. And I sit in awe of it, I really sit in awe of that.
Did you know that Tolkien, because I hadn't noticed this when I first read the books, I don't know, 15 or 16 years ago, but did you know that in the preface he says basically that he created the whole history of the Middle-earth before the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, just because he wanted a backup story to explain where the Elvish languages came from. So,
he was the first big world builder, right?
and I just thought, oh my God, this guy, he was mad, and he just wanted to explain where the languages came from, and he created a massive world to back up the story of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And I mean, there are 13 volumes out there just of the history of Middle-earth.
Isn't that unbelievable? And, I think that's what makes the book so rich, though, because there's so much he's not putting in there that exists, that still sort of bleeds into the manuscript, and I think you do feel that. I think that when a universe is so real like that for a writer, I don't know how it can't possibly affect the words that actually make it to the page. I think that even like in editing, everything that we strike from the manuscript leaves a ghost. Mm-hmm. And I better make sure that my phone is off. I just heard it make a noise, and I do not want it to.
Oh, don't worry. We haven't started the interview.
No, I know, but I want to remember to do that, because who wants the phone going off? It's just irritating. But yeah, I love that kind of stuff. When I was little, I was very lucky. I had a brother who was 8 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I think I must have been 7 years old, and he started reading to me. He was reading the classics to me, and he continued reading to me until he went off to college, which I was very young when he went off to college. Obviously, I was like 10. But from about 7 to 10, I had this sort of golden age with him where he read all the Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan books to me. He read Dracula to me. He read Orwell, 1984. There were just so many books that I would never, especially at that age, would have never picked up on my own, and that I found so interesting, and especially because they were being read to me. And my brother's a really good reader. He's a good performer too, and so I think back on that, and then I think about my own children now, and I think about how I wonder what their tolerance for slowness is, if that makes sense. And I'm not one of those people who thinks, oh, kids today, they can't possibly be experiencing, as rich an intellectual life as I did because they have social media or anything. I don't think that at all, actually. I'm kind of amazed at what they know and the programs they watch. I mean, the things my son introduces me to things on YouTube and really interesting things. And he and my daughter both supplement their education all on their own, and are I think far more informed than I was at their age. But one of the things that I don't know, and maybe this isn't fair, I just wonder if that sort of slow unravel that was part of the classical literature that I grew up with, at least, that I don't even know if it's part of the canon anymore. If they have patience for it, I don't know. And I don't think that what they're consuming is necessarily worse. I just wonder. I mean, my husband and I started watching Being There. Have you ever seen Being There?
Yes. Peter
Sellers. We started watching it last night. Unfortunately, we had storms here, so we had to stop in the middle because we lost power. But it's just such a beautiful film, and such a beautiful novel too. And we were sitting there, and we were going to have our kids watch with us, but they couldn't because they had all this homework. And afterwards, when the power cut out, we're like, I don't think they would have enjoyed it. I just don't think they would have. I think they would have been bored silly by it and would not have understood all the little nuances that we're building to show us this sort of simpleton who rises to these great heights. So I don't know.
I mean, it's also very interesting. It's not just that kids nowadays grow up exposed to much more information. It's also that I think that as you grow older and as you accumulate knowledge, I mean, you start looking at things differently, because talking again about the Lord of the Rings, I mean, when I was 12 and picked up the Fellowship of the Ring, I looked at the book, oh my God, 500 pages long. I
don't want to do this.
This must contain the whole history of the world in here, something like that. But now I go through it and I arrive, for example, at the chapter where they are at Lothlorien and they meet Galadriel and things like that. And it's just a 20-page chapter, and I think, no, this has to be much longer. I want a longer chapter.
I want more. Exactly.
Hi everybody, thank you for watching this interview until the end. As you might have noticed, I've started this channel in February 2018 and have been putting out regular interviews with academics and intellectuals from a variety of fields. To keep the channel sustainable, I would like to ask you to please visit my Patreon page and to consider making a pledge there. If you don't like Patreon, you also have the alternatives of Subscribestar and PayPal. All of the links are in the description box of the video. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons: KARIN, LIETZCKE, Anne Blanchette, Perelga Larsen, GUERREIRO, CHANTEL, GELINAS, Francis Forde, FREDRIK, SUNDE, Brian Rivera, STAFINIAK, SERGIU CODREANU, Jane Enninen, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, John Connors, Adam Castle, Vega Gidi, Doctors Jerry Muller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Vos, and Bo Weingard, and also my 3 producers, Isar Webb, Rosie, and Jim Frank. Thank you for all.